We've reached the 17th lesson in the course, A Critical History of Economic Theory and Policy. In this 17th lesson, we examine the factors that generated a long boom in the United States property markets following the end of the Second World War. Perhaps the clearest indication of how the high cost of land directed the future was the conversion of farmland into suburban communities. Some 13 million new homes were constructed in the United States from 1947 through 1957. Fully 85% of these homes were built at the outer fringes of the nation's cities where land costs were low, at least for a decade or two. However, when funding could be obtained from the federal government, state and local taxes on incomes, on property improvements, on business profits, and on commerce had to be increased to pay for the infrastructure required by the creation of new suburban communities. At the same time, financial reserves needed to modernize and replace aging urban infrastructures was drawn away to provide public goods and services to residents and businesses at the urban fringe and beyond. By the late 1960s, residential property prices in many suburban areas were becoming less and less affordable. In 1969, Time magazine examined the causes of rising housing costs. The Time analysis concluded, since 1950, the price of land for homes has climbed by 16% a year. Land accounts for 1/5 of the total cost of a new house, compared with 1/10 2 decades ago. Inflation of land prices is greatly fostered by the U.S. system of real estate taxation. Localities generally tax vacant land lightly. That makes it easy for speculators to hold land off the market in hopes of selling for more later. Heavy taxation on building inhibits both new construction and improvements on existing structures. Today, most cities collect 2 or 3 times as much revenue from taxes on improvements as from taxes on land. The arrangement subsidizes blight, decay, slum formation, suburban sprawl, and even the premature carving up of fringe acreage into subdivisions. Whatever concerns were being expressed over the rapid loss of open space, of close-in agricultural land, and of wilderness habitat were silenced by a perception that the quality of life was improving for millions of people able to leave aging and disintegrating cities. Economists as a group essentially ignored the societal costs incurred and the price that would have to be paid in remedial efforts to clean the air and water, rebuild soil fertility and biodiversity, decontaminate brownfields, and respond to other environmental disasters. We built everywhere, too often in harm's way and with no thought for the long run. One economist whose writings during the early 20th century reflected his progressive social values and concern for the environment was John R. Commons, who taught at the University of Wisconsin. Uniquely, Commons had studied and absorbed the political economy of Henry George, and he continued to write about the central importance of land markets and tax policy throughout his career. On the origin and growth of land values, he wrote, site value may be increased by good roads, railroads, telegraph, and postal service, and it may be decreased by the same agencies if they serve to move population, industry, and merchandising to other localities. It is therefore a peculiarly social value assigned to or taken from individual owners according to the technological changes in means of transportation whose installation is encouraged or restrained by public policy. In short, decisions regarding the development of publicly funded infrastructure not only generated increases in some land values, but could, by disinvestment elsewhere, cause land values to fall, with shifts in population occurring as a consequence. This process would be played out in a remarkably short period of time following the end of the Second World War. At the heart of the eventual post-war expansion in the United States was the interplay of unique social, political, and market forces. Amazingly, public revenue exceeded expenditures beginning in 1946, bringing down the national debt. At the end of the Second World War, U.S. banks held $30 billion in individual savings accounts. By 1947, nearly $23 billion of this fund was already spent by consumers, and a post-war recession was avoided. Americans were already on the move, from rural towns to urban centers, from the old industrial cities of the North to the West Coast. And when air conditioning became widely available in commercial, industrial, and residential buildings, the South and Southwest. California was the initial magnet for population movement. Over 1.9 million new residents arrived between 1940 and 1945, when the state's manufacturing output tripled. The state's population then grew by about 500,000 per year, overtaking New York as the nation's most populous state in 1963. The Keynesian economists were quick to claim credit for the expansion that occurred during the 1950s, but Alfred Malabra Jr., the longtime economics editor of the Wall Street Journal, concluded that what economists said and wrote was of marginal importance in the post-war period of growth. According to Malabra, a more accurate explanation, however, is simply that the economy was bound to move ahead with peace and victory and enormous pent-up demand after the years of wartime austerity. And yet, there was no uninterrupted period of prosperity following the late 1940s. For millions in the United States and around the globe, poverty remained a generational or societal plague. Reliance on flawed economic theory to forecast the effects of changes in public policy only exacerbated the problem. Speculation-driven booms were always followed by recessionary contraction. A 1949 report titled "The Maintenance of Full Employment," written by a group of economists working under the auspices of the United Nations, revealed just how blind most economists were to the underlying causes of economic cycles. The report stated, for example, the most suitable taxes for such purposes are general sales taxes, Social Security contributions, or personal income taxes. If the rates of taxation were lowered in times of declining demand and raised in times of rising demand, the purchasing power in the hands of consumers could be altered sufficiently to maintain total demand at a stable level. The report makes no mention whatever of the issue of how concentrated is the control over a nation's land and natural resources, or a greater reliance on income from land and other rents to pay for public goods and services, rather than taxing either sales or individual incomes. Harry Gunnison Brown, certainly frustrated by the direction away from the taxation of property to that of income flows and commerce, observed in the 1955 edition of his economics textbook, "To socialize the annual rental value of land would make the people of a nation more prosperous and happy in peace, and it would make them more formidable in war, if war there must be. The economic waste of land speculation would be done away with. Revenues which now go to private individuals for no service in return would be available to the public." Few of his contemporaries were paying attention to Brown's insights, or to any of the other economists who continue to focus attention on the problems of land tenure and taxation around the world. This oversight would continue to plague the economics discipline and how economics was taught to the next generations destined to pursue a career as an economics professor or economist. And with that, we've reached the end of Lesson 17.